Hey guys, I'm back with another tips and tricks video. So recently I've been playing around with our multi-step stamp sets and trying to see what else we can do with them if we can use them for other purposes. Now I discovered that you can make this multitude of trees using just 3 of the stamps from our Coming Up Roses stamp set, and I'm going to show you how. So this is the Wplus9 Coming Up Roses stamp set, and it has all of these builder images here that you can make these gorgeous rose bouquets. It's got filler flowers that could act as status or baby's breath. It's got 2 sizes. So we're going to be focusing on using that filler flower to create these gorgeous trees. Here you can see how it's meant to be used to create these gorgeous little bouquets. But with a little bit of water and a brush, you can create these trees. Now you can create a ton of different trees, and this is so much fun, and it is so simple. I'm going to be working in my kind of my practice notebook here today. I'm not actually going to create a finished card, but this is something that if you're interested in practicing and you want to look back and refer on your work, you can do. This is binded, and I can keep all my practice work in here, and I can list out, what medium I used, the colors I used, any of the brushes, and of course, what it is in my source. I was just throwing all my practice pieces away, but I decided that I really like to keep these all in one place so that I can refer back to them later because I can't remember what I did from one day to the next. So those are the trees that we're going to be painting today. I'll be using this Derwent paintbrush here. It came in a watercolor set, and I discovered I really like it for this technique, the faux painting over the stamps. We're going to be using distress inks, several different colors, and the distress ink markers. You'll need your clean water. You'll need something to clean your stamps, either a baby wipe or paper towel for blotting excess water, and of course your watercolor paper and a scrap piece of watercolor paper off to the side for stamping off onto. We'll be using these 3 stamps mainly, the large stem, the large spray of baby's breath, and then the small little filler baby's breath. That large spray of baby's breath is going to serve as the base for each one of our examples. For this first one, we're going to ink it up with Tim Holtz Distress Inks in Crushed Olive. You can see here I'm not being careful to evenly ink it. I actually do not want a full impression. When I stamp this down, I'm not going to press hard and I'm not going to walk my fingers over it. I just need a little bit of ink to be laid down on the paper in some key areas because we're going to use the brush and water to move this ink around. Now you'll see that I've dipped it in water and then I just used my fingers to pinch off some of the excess water. Now I'm going to lightly tap all around the paper. I don't have a ton of water on this brush. It's damp, but it's not soaking wet. This is going to allow me to start activating some of that distress ink and start moving it around a little. I'm going to leave some hard spots, but I'm going to soften out some others. This is going to create that realistic leafy effect. Be careful not to over soften this layer because we're going to be adding other layers on top of this and softening them. Inevitably this lower layer will get softened even more as well. So I would probably go about halfway as far as you think you'll want it to be in the end. Now the stem for that baby's breath is going to serve as our trunk, and I'll show you how to modify this a little bit to thicken up the base. We'll be using vintage photo marker here, and I'm going to ink this up. Again, I'm going to randomly ink. I don't need to ink the whole thing. The only thing I want to make sure that I get really good is that stem. Line this up over top of the base, make sure your trunk is at least somewhat straight, and stamp. To fatten up that trunk, we're going to use, you can use either the fine tip side or the brush tip side, but I'm going to start thickening up this base a little. Now, I'm not going to draw a thick line. I'm actually going to draw a line on the other side of the trunk. In some spots, I may draw a line, but when we get down to the bottom where that trunk is going to be thickest, you'll see I didn't just fill in a complete solid area. I'm just kind of making sketchy lines. I'm also adding some extra little branches here at the top. The trees usually don't have one straight trunk. Sometimes that just looks strange. So to make it look a little more organic, I have a shoot coming off of the right there, you'll see, and then I'm just adding a little bit more ink to help thicken up those thinner stems. Now I can come in here with my water and blend out this trunk. Now because I didn't put a big solid hunk of color there at the bottom, I'm going to get that nice watercolor effect where it bleeds off and fades in the middle and gives a look of the trunk being rounded. While that trunk is still wet, I can come in with the marker and add just a little bit more color, and that's going to add some shadows. Because the paper's wet, that ink is going to continue to bleed. You could stop here, but let's take it a step further and build out this tree a little bit more. To add some shadowed leaves, or possibly if we were doing a fall tree, this could look like the leaves were turning, we're going to use Victorian Velvet. Now this has a great violet underbase to it, which is great for adding shadows. We're going to use the small baby's breath sprig here, and we're not going to ink up the whole thing. If we were to stamp this repeatedly, you'd see that same pattern over and over again, and it would not look very realistic. Now with the ink pads, they give off a lot more ink than the markers do. So I like to stamp these off. It's going to give you a nice softer watercolor effect. Each time that I ink this up, I'm going to ink up a little bit more or a little bit less of this image, and then I'm just going to stamp it. I want these to look kind of like they're in the background a little bit. And then I'm just going to come in and use the same technique to soften out some of these edges. Again, I'm still going to leave some hard edges and then soften out some others. Now you may be wondering why I didn't just stamp all of these and then come in and add the water. Now that's because I do want some separation in these two colors. I want them to mix in some places, but not all over the place. Had I laid down all of my color and then just started mixing, these would have melded together and I wouldn't have any crisp edges. Now let's add a suggestion of some ground here. I'm going to lay down a little bit of that crushed olive, and again, I'm not drawing any straight lines. I'm just kind of hitting here and there and adding some color. And now I'm going to use that wet brush to kind of push it around. You see, I'm not really going in straight lines. I'm kind of going in an up and down motion, and that's so that when it dries, I don't have any smooth edges. I want it to look like a grassy field. For a little more interest, we can even drop a little bit of brown in here. How about some flowers? We can make it look like some flowers are down here on the ground. I'm just going to add some dots of this worn lipstick. I'm going to smooth that out. Again, remember, we don't have to try to make this too detailed. Don't try to draw out any petals or anything like that. We're just using the suggestion of flowers here. The mind, when you view it, you will fill in the details. If you see pink on the ground, you're automatically going to think flowers. You see these soft blurry shapes, and that's what you're going to imagine. You can draw some up higher and then connect it to the ground with some little flick marks like stems. This will just further reinforce the idea that these are flowers. If you want, you can even come in and add a few more little flicks to look like stray blades of grass. Now let's turn this into a bush. We're going to use the same base and we're going to ink it up in the same method that we did the top of the tree for the first example, but here we're going to stamp it on the ground. When we add the water to this one, we're also going to use more water. We want a little more solid, bushes are more compact and more solid, so we want a little bit more color. We don't want quite as many breaks, but we do still want some of those white breaks to serve as some separation. So here you can see I am softening this one quite a bit more than I did the last one. There are several different ways that you can bring this image to life and really make it your own. Here we're going to make it look like the sunlight is shining on the right side. So we're going to take some spiced marmalade, we're going to stamp it off twice, and we're going to use the third generation impression to add some yellow, orangey yellow leaves. Now this is going to make it look like that sun is hitting those leaves and turning it this nice bright yellowy color. Now, if the sun is shining on the right, then we should probably add some shadows on the left and underneath the bush. Here we're going to use the second generation impression of peeled paint, and we're going to do the exact same thing. Stamp it down and add our water to kind of move that ink around. And then we're going to ground it with a little bit of brown and green. And there you have a bush. You can also create apple trees with this. So here I've used the second generation stamping of peeled paint, and for this one I'm going to use water and a swirling motion. I'm going to try to leave some white breaks in there to sneak in some apples or the suggestion of some apples. But for this one I am making it look less spiky and more rounded. And you can see that I'm using a lot more water on this one than I did on the previous ones. I've stamped my stem, and this time I shortened it by taking some of the ink off the bottom. Wanted to make this one look like it's back further, and now I'm going to just thicken up this base and modify the stem a little bit, make it look more tree or trunk-like instead of stem-like. To add some apples, I'm just going to use, you could use any dot stamp. I'm actually using one of the flower centers from our Fresh Cut Floral stamp set, or you could use your brush dipped into a little bit of ink. All you really need to do is get a little spot of color down and then soften it with your brush. Let's take a look at how to make it look like there's a shadow cast on the ground here. So say the sun was rising or setting and you wanted to add a little shadow here. I'm going to lay down a little bit more of the brown and a little bit more of the green to make it more of a muddy color. And then I'm just going to soften that out with some water. Finally, let's take a look at how to use this to create some flowering trees. Here in Florida, we have a lot of Crape Myrtles, and I just love them. So here I'm inking this up with worn lipstick and stamping it down. You can see, again, I'm not worrying about a clear impression. I need the break in colors there. I need that paper to show through. I'm going to use pretty much the same technique that I used on the first one, except for I'm going to use a lot more color, just a tiny bit of green, and I'm going to fill this one out a little bit wider and a little bit droopier. To add in just a hint of green, I'm using that same image, and then I'm using that crushed olive marker to just kind of dot it on this image here, and then I'm just going to stamp it directly over top. You can't really see it on camera, it's not coming across, but it's there. And again, you just need that little bit, that little suggestion, because your mind will fill in the details. I've added my trunk on this one, and now it's time to kind of fill this tree out. For this, I'm using two colors. I'm going to use that Victorian Velvet again, and then I'm also going to use some more of that worn lipstick. I'm doing the stamp off because I don't want it to be too vibrant with the shadowed one. I want these to be softer. And I'm just randomly stamping this all around. Now I can come in with the ink pad of that worn lipstick, and I do want this one to be a little bit more vibrant. My spiral notebook was getting in the way there, so I had to move it. But you'll notice that I am turning this stamp, I'm inking up just portions here and there, and I'm just using that random shape of the image itself and some creative inking to create a very organic tree shape. And then I'll just soften up some of those edges. Again, here I'm using just the damp brush. I've dipped it in water and removed some of the excess with my fingers. And now I'm just softening out some of those edges. I'm leaving some of the hard ones and softening out others. Now as this dried, I noticed that on my bush here I was losing that left side. So I'm going to show you really quick how you can reclaim that. I'm going to use that peeled paint and I'm going to stamp it off. And then I'm just going to come in and add a little bit darker right there on that edge, and that's going to help push this to the front and push that ground to the back. And again, we've just reclaimed that tree and it no longer is fading into the ground. Once this was dry, I thought I'd show you how to turn this into like a fall tree. So I'm going to start adding in some of that spiced marmalade, but this time I'm using the second generation stamping. And this is going to look like we have turning leaves on this tree. There are so many different options and so many things that you could do with this. Really all I can say is just be careful because it is addictive and it's a lot of fun. So there you have 4 different types of trees or bushes that you can use the same 3 stamps to create these watercolor looking paintings. Play around with it and see what you can do. Here I created a little scene. I stamped the 2 back trees lighter and shorter and then reinforced that front tree with some darker color and made him taller. I hope this gave you some ideas for how to look at your stamps in a new way. Don't forget that you can find all of the featured Wplus9 supplies at Wplus9.com. You can also connect with us on our blog at stampawaywithme.blogspot.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest. I really hope that you liked today's video. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.